You've been told your whole life that renting is throwing money away, that every check you write to a landlord is gone forever, evaporated, a payment on someone else's freedom. And that buying is the smart move, the adult move, the move that turns you from a renter into an owner. That's the story. Everybody knows that story. There's just one problem with it. When you actually run the numbers, the real numbers in this market right now, that story falls apart. Because the math doesn't care about pride of ownership. The math doesn't care that the house is yours. And in a lot of America today, the math is quietly pointing in a direction nobody wants to admit out loud. I'm going to show you the whole calculation. A $400,000 house. A real mortgage. Real maintenance, real taxes, real insurance, the costs nobody adds up before they sign. And on the other side, a renter who does one boring thing with the difference. By the end, you'll have a single number that decides this for you. And it's not how long you plan to live there. It's something else entirely. I'm not here to tell you renting is good and buying is bad. That's a guru's answer, and it's lazy. I'm here to do the thing almost no one does before the biggest financial decision of their life. Actually build the spreadsheet. Both sides. Every cost. No cheating in either direction. I read the mortgage math so you don't have to sit there with an amortization table at midnight. And what I found surprised me, which is exactly why it's worth 28 minutes of your attention. I expected to find a clean answer that buying wins if you stay long enough. That's the answer I was taught too. It's not the answer the spreadsheet gave me. The spreadsheet gave me something more useful and a lot more uncomfortable, and I'm going to hand it to you exactly as I found it. Here's the reframe that changes everything. When you rent, you pay rent. Everyone agrees that's the cost of having a roof. But when you buy with a mortgage, you also pay rent, you just pay it to a bank instead of a landlord. It's called interest. And in the early years of a mortgage, almost everything you pay is interest. So the honest version of the sentence isn't renting is throwing money away. The honest version is this: renting isn't throwing money away. It's renting money, and so is a mortgage. A renter rents an apartment. A buyer rents the bank's money. Both are paying for access to something they don't fully own yet. The only question worth asking is which form of renting leaves you richer at the end. That's a number. Let's go find it. Let's take the phrase apart, because it's the most expensive piece of folk wisdom in American life. Renting is throwing money away. The logic feels airtight. You pay rent, you get nothing back, the money's gone. You buy, you build equity, the money comes back. Renting equals loss. Buying equals wealth. Case closed. Except it isn't closed, because the phrase hides a sleight of hand. Compares all of your rent against none of the costs of owning. It treats your rent check as pure waste while treating your mortgage payment as pure savings. And neither of those is true. When you rent, yes, the rent is gone. But so is a huge chunk of a mortgage payment. In year one of a $400,000 loan, the majority of every payment is interest. Money that goes to the bank and never comes back. That's rent. You're renting the bank's money. The phrase conveniently forgets that part. Run the actual amortization, and in the first year you'll pay over $23,000 in interest alone. $23,000 that builds you exactly zero equity. Call that what it is. That's rent with extra steps. And on the other side, renting isn't pure waste either, as long as the renter does one thing. Invests the money they didn't spend on the down payment, the maintenance, the taxes, the insurance. The renter who spends the difference on nothing, that renter loses. But the renter who invests it, that's a different person entirely. And that's the person the folk wisdom never imagines, because the folk wisdom needs the renter to be irresponsible to make the story work. So here's the real contest. It was never buyer versus renter. It's buyer versus renter who invests the difference. Two disciplined people, same income, same starting point. One buys, one rents and invests. Who's richer in 10 years? That's the only honest version of the question. And the answer is going to bother some of you. Let's build it from zero, fair to both sides. Two people. Same money. Same day. Person one buys a $400,000 house. They put 10% down, that's $40,000. They finance the other $360,000 at 6.5%, which is roughly where 30-year mortgage rates sit right now. Their principal and interest payment comes out to about $2,300 a month. Person 2 takes the exact same $40,000, the down payment they didn't make, and puts it into a low-cost index fund. Then they rent. The median rent in America is around $1,400 a month. That's their housing cost. Done. Now here's where most comparisons cheat, and I won't. They stop at $2,300 versus $1,400 and say, see, buying costs $900 more, but that $900 builds equity. Wrong. That $2,300 is only principal and interest. It's not the real cost of owning. Not even close. We'll get to the rest in a minute. That's the part that ambushes people. But even just on the surface, notice what we've set up. The renter is starting with $40,000 already invested and growing. The buyer's $40,000 is locked in the walls of a house, doing whatever the housing market decides to do. From the very first day, these two are running different machines. One machine compounds in the market at the historical real return of about 7% a year. The other machine grows at whatever a house appreciates, historically something like 2.5% to 3.5% a year, before you subtract everything it costs to keep the thing standing. 7% versus 3.5%. Hold that gap in your head, because that gap is the whole video. Everything else is detail. The buyer's money grows slower and gets eaten by costs. The renter's money grows faster and gets eaten by nothing, if and only if they actually invest it instead of blowing it. That if is real and we'll come back to it. But assume two disciplined people, and the renter's starting position is already quietly winning. The buyer feels richer, though. That's the thing. The buyer can stand in their kitchen and say, "This is mine." The renter just has a number on a brokerage app. The feeling and the math are pointing in opposite directions from day one. Remember that, because feeling is what sells houses and math is what builds wealth, and they are not the same force. Let me make the two machines completely explicit because this is the foundation everything else sits on. The buyer's $40,000 is now a down payment. It is not liquid. It is not compounding in a market. It is converted into a slice of a physical object whose value will drift up or down based on what strangers in your zip code are willing to pay. The only way that $40,000 grows is if the house itself appreciates. And even then, you can't spend it without selling the house or borrowing against it. This wealth you live inside but can't touch. The renter's $40,000 is the opposite. The sitting in an index fund, fully liquid, compounding at the historical real return of roughly 7% a year. In year one, that's already throwing off around $2,800 in growth. Money the buyer's down payment can't match unless the housing market has a genuinely hot year. And it does this silently, automatically, with no roof to fix and no tax bill attached. Now layer on the monthly piece. The buyer is committing to about $2,300 a month just in principal and interest. Of that $2,300, in the first year, somewhere around $2,000 is pure interest, rent paid to the bank. Only a few $100s a month is actually buying down the loan. So the "I'm building equity every month" story is mostly a story for the first several years. The equity trickles in slowly while the interest pours out fast. That's not a flaw in our example. That's how amortization is designed to work on every mortgage everywhere. Meanwhile, the renter pays $1,400, full stop, and takes the gap between the two and feeds it to the fast machine. Same income, same discipline. Two completely different engines running underneath two lives that look almost identical from the street. Now let's add the costs nobody calculates. This is where the buyer's real position falls apart, and it falls apart quietly, a little every month, in ways that never show up as a single scary bill. Start with maintenance. The rule of thumb, and it's a conservative one, is 1% of the home's value every year. On a $400,000 house, that's $4,000 a year. About $330 a month every month, forever. And 1% is the floor. For older homes, the real range runs up to 3 or 4%. Roofs, water heaters, HVAC systems, the tree that falls on the garage. The renter calls the landlord. The owner writes the check. Then property taxes. Nationally, that's somewhere around 1.1% of the home's value a year. Another roughly $367 a month. The renter doesn't pay this. It's baked invisibly into their rent. Sure, but they never write the check and they never eat an increase when the county reassesses. Then insurance. Homeowner's insurance runs the average owner about $1,800 a year. call it $150 a month. The renter's insurance for their stuff costs a tiny fraction of that. Add it up. The buyer's real monthly cost isn't $2,300. It's principal and interest of $2,300 plus $330 in maintenance, plus $367 in taxes, plus $150 in insurance. That's about $3,125 a month. Not $2,300. $3,125. So the real gap isn't $900 between buying and renting. It's $1,725. Every single month, the buyer is spending about $1,725 more than the renter. And here's the part that should make you sit up. Only a slice of that extra money is building equity. The maintenance is gone. The taxes are gone. The insurance is gone. The interest is gone. The phrase "throwing money away" describes the homeowner's monthly statement far better than it describes the renter's. And what does the disciplined renter do with that $1,725 a month? They invest it, on top of the $40,000 that's already growing. Every month, another $1,725 into the market, compounding at 7% real, while the buyer's money disappears into a roof and a tax bill and a bank's interest column. Let me sit on that maintenance number for a second, because it's the one people refuse to believe until it happens to them. 1% a year sounds trivial. $4,000 on a $400,000 house. But maintenance doesn't arrive as a smooth monthly bill. It arrives as a $15,000 roof in year 8. A $12,000 HVAC system in year 11. A foundation problem you didn't know existed when you bought. Average it out and it's $1,000 a quarter drip. Live it and it's a series of gut punches. The renter, through all of it, calls a phone number and waits for someone else to pay. That's not laziness. That's a transferred cost, and transferred costs are real money. And taxes don't stay still. When the county reassesses and your home value has climbed, your tax bill climbs with it. The thing people celebrate, "My house went up in value," quietly raises one of the costs that was already eating them. Appreciation giveth, and the assessor taketh a slice right back. The renter is insulated from that entire mechanism. Added up over the first year alone, the buyer spends roughly $37,800 to own. The renter spends about $16,800 to rent and invests the rest. $21,000 of difference in a single year, most of it flowing into a compounding account on the renter's side and into thin air on the buyer's side. Multiply that pattern across a decade and you start to see why the gap doesn't close. It compounds. This is the open loop from a minute ago paid off. The rent is not the only thing you pay when you buy. You pay rent to the bank, rent to the county, rent to the roof, and rent to the insurance company. The renter pays rent to exactly one person and invests the rest. Renting isn't throwing money away. It's renting money, and the buyer is renting it from 4 landlords at once. So let's run it all the way out. 10 years. Both people, every cost, every dollar invested, compounding honestly. I built the whole month-by-month model. Here's what comes out. After 10 years, the buyer's equity, the home's value minus what's left on the mortgage, assuming a healthy 3.5% appreciation, is about $262,000. Not bad. That's real wealth. The renter who invested the difference, about $350,000. The renter is ahead by roughly $88,000. After 10 years. And before anyone says, "Well, that's because you lowballed the house appreciation." I ran it both ways. At a conservative 2.5% appreciation, closer to long-run inflation, the renter's lead at 10 years isn't $90,000. It's about $141,000. The lower the appreciation, the worse buying looks. And at the more generous 3.5%, the renter still wins by $88,000. There is no appreciation rate in the realistic range where the buyer comes out ahead at 10 years. I went looking for one. It isn't there. Now, you've been promised a turning point. The year buying finally pulls ahead. So let's keep going. Year 15. The renter's lead has grown to $163,000. Year 20. About $274,000 ahead. Year 25. About $435,000. Year 30, when the mortgage is finally paid off and the buyer owns the house free and clear and feels like they've won, the buyer has about $1.14 million in equity. The renter has 1.82 million in the market. The renter is ahead by about $675,000. There is no turning point. In this market, with these numbers, the buyer never catches up. The gap just widens. Every year you wait for buying to win, it loses by more. That's the opposite of what the story promised you. And it's worth letting that land. And that's the open loop from the very beginning, finally paid. The number that decides this isn't how long you stay. It's not the calendar at all. I ran the math forward and backward, and the real lever is the relationship between your rent and the cost of buying. Specifically, if your rent is below about 60% of what it would cost you to own the equivalent, that's roughly $1,850 a month against our $3,125 cost of owning, renting and investing wins. Above that line, buying starts to win. The decision was never about time. It was about ratio. Sit with how strange that is for a second. Two people could make the exact opposite correct decision in two different cities on the same income, and both be right because the only thing that changed was the local ratio between rent and price. The advice you should buy isn't true or false in general. It's true or false in your zip code, at today's rate, against your actual rent. Anyone who gives you a universal answer is selling something, usually a house. That's why the folk wisdom feels true to your parents and false to your spreadsheet. When they bought, the ratio was different. Houses cost 15, 16 times annual rent. Today, the median house costs around 24 times the median rent. The machine they used to build wealth has been recalibrated, and nobody sent out the memo. They're not lying to you. They're quoting a market that no longer exists. Let me make this concrete because numbers slide off the brain and people stick. Picture two people. Same job, same salary, same $40,000 saved. Call them the same person, even the same person facing the same fork on the same Tuesday. One version buys. One version rents. Let's watch both lives run. The first one buys. The day she closes, she stands in an empty living room that echoes, and she feels something the renter will never feel. This floor is mine. That feeling is worth a lot to her. It's not nothing. I'm not going to pretend it's nothing. Her parents come over and they cry a little because to them this is the finish line, the proof that she made it. Nobody at that house walkthrough is running an amortization schedule. The feeling fills the whole room. The second one rents a smaller place and sets up an automatic transfer, $40,000 in at the start, $1,725 a month after that, straight into an index fund he never looks at. No echoing living room. No pride. No parents crying. Just a transfer that fires on the first of every month while he's asleep. It is the least emotionally satisfying financial decision a person can make. Feels like nothing. Feels like he's renting his whole life away. For the first few years, the buyer looks like the winner in every way that's visible. She has a house. He has an apartment and an app. At every dinner party, she's the responsible adult and he's the guy who still rents. The story everyone tells favors her completely. He starts to wonder if he made a mistake. This is the crisis, and notice it's not a financial crisis. The numbers are fine. The crisis is social. It's the slow erosion of confidence that comes from doing the mathematically right thing while everyone around you treats it as the immature thing. But the machines are running underneath. Her house is appreciating at 3.5% and bleeding $1,725 a month in costs that build nothing. His fund is compounding at 7% real and bleeding nothing. The hard part for him was never the math. It was the 10 years of feeling like he was doing the irresponsible thing while the number quietly told him he wasn't. Every year he had to re-choose the boring machine over the one that felt like adulthood. Here's the resolution, and it's not the one you'd guess. They were both disciplined. Neither one was the fool. The difference between them wasn't character. It was which machine they fed. She fed the slow one because it felt safe and looked like adulthood. He fed the fast one because he ran the numbers and trusted them more than he trusted the feeling. 10 years later, he's $88,000 richer, and she has a kitchen that's hers. Both of those are real. Only one of them is wealth. And the part nobody warns you about is that choosing the wealth meant spending a decade looking like you'd chosen wrong. And here's the twist that makes this more than a math problem. If she had known, if someone had shown her this exact spreadsheet before she signed, she still might have bought. Because the echoing living room was worth something to her that no index fund returns. That's a legitimate choice. The tragedy isn't that she bought. The tragedy is that nobody showed her the spreadsheet, so she never knew she was paying $88,000 for that feeling. She thought she was making the smart money move. She was actually buying something more personal than that, at a price she never saw quoted. That's the difference this video is trying to make. Not to talk you out of the house, but to make sure you see the price tag on the feeling before you pay it. Now let me argue the other side honestly, because if I don't, I'm just another guru with a different bias. Buying genuinely wins in real situations, and you need to know them. First, when the ratio flips. If you live somewhere that rent is expensive relative to home prices, and those markets exist, plenty of them, then the line moves and buying pulls ahead. The whole calculation hinges on that 60% threshold. Run it for your city, not for the national average. Second, when you lock a low rate for the long haul. Somebody who fixed a 3% mortgage years ago is playing a completely different game than someone borrowing at 6.5% today. A cheap, fixed mortgage in an inflationary world is one of the best deals in personal finance. If that's you, the math may already favor staying put. Third, and this one isn't financial, so I won't fake a number for it, there's the value of control and stability. Nobody raises your rent. Nobody sells the building out from under you. You can knock down a wall, plant a tree, stay for 30 years. For a family putting kids through one school district, that stability has real worth. The math says rent and invest. But the math doesn't tuck your kids in. You're allowed to pay a premium for a life you want. Just do it knowing it's a premium, not because someone told you renting is throwing money away. That's the honest boundary. I'm not telling you to rent. I'm telling you to run your own ratio and then decide with your eyes open. And there's a fourth case I'd be dishonest to skip. Forced savings. The dirty secret of the rent and invest the difference strategy is that most people don't invest the difference. They mean to, they don't. The mortgage, for all its inefficiency, is a contract that forces you to build equity whether you feel like it or not. The market doesn't send you a late notice. So if you know yourself, if you know that $1,725 a month would quietly become a nicer car and a few more dinners out, then the buyer's worst machine that you'll actually run beats the renter's better machine that you won't. A mediocre plan you execute beats a brilliant plan you abandon. For a lot of real human beings, that alone justifies buying, and I won't pretend otherwise. Alright, you know what's happening. Now here's exactly what to do with it. Take the home you're actually considering. Find its price. Run the full monthly cost of owning it, not just principal and interest. Add maintenance at 1% of the price divided by 12, property taxes for your county, and insurance. That total is your real cost of owning. Now multiply that number by 60%. That's your line. If you can rent a place you'd actually be happy in for less than that line, the math says rent and invest the difference. And you now know the difference is bigger than you thought because you're counting all the costs, not just the mortgage. Let me walk one all the way through so you can copy it exactly. Say the house you're eyeing is $350,000. Principal and interest at today's rate with 10% down runs about $2,000 a month. Add maintenance, $350,000 times 1% divided by 12 is about $290. Add taxes, call it $320. Add insurance, about $140. Your real cost of owning is roughly $2,750 a month. Take about 60% of that and your line lands near $1,650. If you can rent comfortably for under $1,650, renting and investing wins. If every decent rental in your area is $2,000, you're above the line and buying may be your move. Same formula, different city, different answer. That's the whole point. You stop guessing and you start knowing. And then the part that makes it real, actually invest the difference. Set up the automatic transfer the same day. Because the renter who invests beats the buyer, but the renter who spends the difference on a nicer car loses to everyone. The strategy only works if you feed the machine. The discipline isn't optional. It's the entire point. A renter who doesn't invest is just a renter, and then yes, they really are throwing money away. The investing is what turns renting from a cost into a strategy. So let's put the whole thing back together. You were told renting is throwing money away. The truth is that renting is renting money, and so is a mortgage, just to a different landlord with a better suit. Both are ways of paying for access to a place to live. The only question that matters is which one leaves you richer. And in this market, for most people, the answer is not the one you were raised to believe. There was never a magic year when buying wins. There's a ratio. Below about 60% of the cost of owning, renting and investing pulls ahead and stays ahead, about 90,000 ahead in 10 years, 675,000 ahead in 30. The decision was never about time. It was about the gap between what you'd pay to rent and what you'd really pay to own. And the reason this surprises everyone, the reason it sounds wrong even as I say it, is that the market changed and the wisdom didn't. Your parents bought into a ratio that built wealth. You're being handed the same advice for a ratio that doesn't. They're not wrong about their world. They're wrong about yours. So run your number. Find your line. And whatever you choose, buy for the life you want or rent for the wealth you'll build. Choose it because you did the math, not because somebody handed you a sentence that stopped being true a generation ago. The house can be yours. Just make sure the decision is too.